This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachat, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. This is part 2 of answering the questions we didn't get to in the Our Kratom AMA. We talk about Kratom regulations, Kratom as a pharma drug, dopamine, libido, weird effects, hallucinogens with a family history of bipolar. We'd like to make this a regular part of the journal club. If you should have any questions for Dr. Cachat about drug effects on the brain or Kratom in general, leave a voicemail at 412-353-9770. That's 412-353-9770. And the next question is just kind of an opinion one. How do you think the opinion of public/regulatory bodies/medical field will change as more Kratom research is done? Additionally, do you think Kratom is being villainized in America because it could potentially take business away from pharmaceutical companies?
I do think that if people are choosing Kratom over pharmaceutical or big pharma compounds, that it's not going to go unnoticed, and it's not going to go, like, big pharma is not going to back out of the market, with their hands tied and their head down and just leave it. But there's no immediate evidence to suggest this. But I think it is being villainized, or at least it was. I think that, there's you can see when it's getting villainized because there's a string of local news stories that all are sort of talking about the same thing, just with a new local area in which they're talking about. And parents, make sure you stick by after 6 while we tell you what the newest drug craze with your students are, what they're doing at school. And it's just fear mongering and hysteria. And, I think that, what was the journal club where we chatted with Mark? There was the three of us, Mark, Brian, and myself, were talking a lot about the sort of hysteria and the history of the drug war as it relates to using it to justify prohibition. So I don't think it's crazy to think that Kratom is being villainized. I think it was being villainized heavily maybe 3 or 4 years ago in attempts to get it prohibited, but that didn't work because the Kratom community showed up at local hearings and shared their truth and put faces to the name of who these Kratom users are, and that has fought back a lot of bans. But then again, it looks like somebody's trying to slip something through Tennessee. I got an email from AKA about a House bill. You see these House bills from freshman legislators, their first or second year in a state legislature, and they really have no, their past interests or profession has nothing to do with this. So how did they get a Kratom bill? Generally, and this happens a lot, the lobbyists in the industry wrote the bill, gave it to her along with a donation and said, she can get this passed. It's an unfortunate reality, but that's how it really works.
Yeah, and sometimes I think in the case with the Pennsylvania guy, it's just this: somebody died, they had Kratom in their system, so it was labeled a Kratom-related death. This guy, he's just a local, rep. He wants to do something about it and look like he's doing something about it, so he's like, okay, let's do a ban bill. But I think it's that the whole media misconception kind of feeds into people calling their legislators, why is this stuff legal? My neighbor's son died of it. Meanwhile, the kid probably had fentanyl in his system. Something can be said for political activism because somebody's going to put pressure on your rep, and if you're not going to do it, then somebody else is with a different interest. So it's good to at least contact your reps and be like, this stuff works for me. I think it should be legal because it could be potentially help people, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is important. If there's a local issue or a local hearing, a public hearing on Kratom, if you're a Kratom user and you don't want to see it illegal, or you don't want to wake up one day as a criminal because you have Kratom, then you have to get out and you have to go participate in those local political discussions, and share, what you use, why you use it, how effective it's been for you, how long you've been using it. All that stuff is the only way really to beat the local initiatives. When bills go unopposed and the legislature that's sponsoring them, or the man or woman that's sponsoring them, doesn't really care about what the bill's even about. They just were asked to pass it. They'll just pass it through. It doesn't. They won't think twice about it. So you have to be there locally to, and hopefully that was the goal with this podcast. Hopefully you guys can pull some of the studies that we've mentioned or reviewed here and talk to your representative about it, because they don't know. I can tell you that for sure.
This next guy, AZHZ96, many, including myself, sometimes experience a lot of effects, but then one day you get zero effects from the same dose, same batch on an empty stomach. Why is this? I paid attention to what food and ingredients I consume. That sounds like a tolerance issue, like you're building up a tolerance.
No, because he's saying, like, essentially the next day it would come back. Like, there's just random days in which he gets zero effects from the same dose, same batch, and on an empty stomach. I've also noticed that, and I have no clue why that happens. The first thing I think you ruled out all of the potential primary causes: changing the dose, changing the batch, full or empty stomach. So beyond that, it's really tough to say. I mean, you could speculate that it may have something to do with, like depletion of neurotransmitters, or, giving yourself a break. I don't know exactly. But I know what you're talking about, and I have not been able to find a specific pattern related to it at all either.
Yeah, I mean, certain days I get less of the effects, and then some days I don't. I mean, I don't even take Kratom every day. I'll do it for like 4 days in a row and then stop, and then not even do it for a week and then come back. So for me, it's definitely not a tolerance issue. If I do it one day from the other, it doesn't have the same effects. But
I think it goes the other way around too, where like sometimes the same dose can give you stronger effects. Mm-hmm. And that's also weird. So I don't know why that is.
Is it because maybe if it's a blend of two different batches, which a lot of vendors will do just to have a different product, might not be mixed as well. They might have just put it's the one, the green on the bottom and the red on top, and just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good guess. But with how pulverized and ground up all the plant material is, like, it would be really hard not to assume that it's a homogeneous batch, meaning that like the two were mixed thoroughly. So. I don't know. I think that if they're grinding this stuff up and mixing it in a giant vat, which I assume they are, it would be difficult for like one section to have an area that has like no metragenine in it. It's not impossible for sure, but I don't think that manufacturing effects is behind it either. I think it has something to do with like available circulating transmitter levels or signaling molecule levels. Maybe it has something to do with like your immune system and the interaction between the immune system and your nervous system. But it's just shooting darts. Usually it's something to do with like, did you have a fatty lunch or a leafy like green lunch without saturated fats? That can definitely change how medications are absorbed in the stomach, but he's saying even on an empty stomach. So yeah, I agree with that this happens sometimes. I agree that it goes both ways too. I would add that it goes both ways. Why that happens, unknown.
Yeah, well, how does it work with the fats with cannabis? I feel like I asked you this before, but it's fat soluble. So does that mean like if you eat a fatty meal, it'll increase the effects?
No, so it's hydrophobic, so cannabinoids travel with fats. So if you have a fatty lunch and you eat an edible, I think that the edible may kick in a little bit faster. I don't necessarily think it like washes it out. I think that it gets like it blends in the oil, and then the oil, it can like transmit through the intestines a little bit faster. I don't know how it would change like the pH of your stomach either. The pH can have a big effect on how things are metabolized.
Okay.
But yeah, kratom is fat soluble, and they're essentially like fatty molecules. That's why you can fail a cannabis test like several days or 2 weeks or so after you consumed it, because it gets sort of lodged in with your fat stores. I think that it would assist in the absorption, not prevent.
I feel like we talked about regulation.
Well, yeah. Do you imagine a world where kratom is regulated as marijuana in legal states? Where do you think the substance is headed? No, I don't think we'll ever see an entire industry built around kratom, where people are like buying and spending multi-million dollars on cultivation operations and facilities to then, sell in specifically licensed cannabis stores.
Yeah.
I think that it's headed more down the way of like supplements or vitamins, and hopefully I think we'll see more kratom cultivated in the U.S. and products made from that. But I think that's where kratom is headed. Not like cannabis.
I mean, I feel like because people learned a lot about cannabis from growing it for years underground, and there hasn't been that with kratom yet. So it's not even, we're not even close to reproducing the stuff with the alkaloids like that's in Indonesia over in the United States. So for one thing, we can't have. It's going to be a long time before we have domestic growing operations that actually produce something that we're consuming now. I think. I was a farmer for 7 years, and it's like it takes you a whole year to learn. I shouldn't have done that with the lettuce. I mean, well, lettuce is an easy one, but it takes you a year. It's like it takes generations to learn this stuff. So I think, it's going to be a lot different. I mean, we're probably going to have to import most of it.
And cannabis was illegal, and it's overcoming being illegal. Right? Kratom
it's legal.
Have that prohibition. Yeah,
so it has less regulation than cannabis does now. It definitely, a lot less. So it'll be different. But okay, next question. Obviously, morphine-based opioids like hydrocodone, oxycodone are the main semi-synthetic opioids used in medicine. Do you see anything like this potentially happening with kratom? Yeah, I mean, already they're studying like extracted mitragynine, and now they're just realizing that extracted mitragynine is not going to do the same thing as the entourage effect of everything in kratom. I think they're going in that direction. They are trying to make it into a medicine. I think University of Florida wants to do that eventually, develop it into a medicine with the right amount of alkaloids, and it's good because it hits on all those different receptors. So it's definitely a superior drug to it would be a superior drug to opiates or opioid derivatives, because it hits on those different receptors. So it has a lot of that antidepressive stuff, I think, that we're going to find out. And it also has the opioid, withdrawal treatment effects.
Yeah. I think for sure we're going to see mitragynine based compounds. Like, you look at the chemical structure of mitragynine or the other kratom alkaloids, figure out ways that you can modify it to make it patentable or cross the blood-brain barrier, which you wouldn't have to. Mitragynine does, but they'll look for something that they can do to change it that doesn't change the effects or reduces any potential risk that's discovered, and then put it in a pill and sell it. So do I see this thing being a possibility at some point? Like, of course, always. And, that's what Big Pharma does, is look at natural compounds and then build on top of them or replicate them, so they can put them in a pill form. So yes, definitely a possibility, and I think Brian's right. It is already happening. I think that there are like companies already formed that are like trying to gather IP for mitragynine based painkillers that then hopefully they want to sell to the big pharma once they get it through phase 1 or clinical trials or something like that. But it's happening for sure.
This one's interesting. Can you please analyze the risk of serotonin syndrome of using kratom with medications like Strattera? I looked up Strattera, which is also atomexetine. This is the first time I've heard of that, but there's nothing on that specific drug on PubMed at all with kratom, or mitragynine. So I'm not too sure about that.
So I mentioned serotonin syndrome when we were talking about the neurotoxicity effects, and that like serotonin syndrome is a potentially neurotoxic situation when the cells are bathed or overstimulated by serotonin. It looks like that Strattera is a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So it's not a serotonergic, it's not an SSRI, it would be a SNRI. Norepinephrine or noradrenaline is a catecholamine neurotransmitter, so it's in the same family as dopamine and serotonin. So again, on this, I think that there's two parts of me. The one that wants to be cautious will say, like, if you're taking two compounds that increase the amount of serotonin in your system, you may want to be careful because serotonin syndrome is real. We learned a lot about serotonin syndrome during the rave days. Like MDMA was legal, and there was a lot of people who that's why everybody drinks water when they're at a rave to try to help avoid that. But then there's another part of me that says there are millions in the U.S. taking Strattera, and of that, there's probably quite a large subset that is taking it with kratom, and the risk of serotonin syndrome in taking what would be normal therapeutic doses of both of those is very low. It's not zero, but it's low. If you're taking more, if you're taking more than what your Strattera prescription says, and you're putting on top of that the kratom and a lot of kratom, your risk gets increased even more. So it's not like it's going to happen in the therapeutic doses and the therapeutic window. Serotonin syndrome isn't like an inevitability, but the more you take and at the same time, the higher the risk becomes. Just be careful.
And the next question's from a deleted account. How do kratom and dopamine agonists react with one another? I mean, we touched on dopamine a little bit on potential for kratom as an antidepressant, antipsychotic when we talked about that on the second episode of Journal Club, but this is a more kind of specific thing.
So kratom binds to dopaminergic receptors. So kratom, if you take the kratom and you're taking it with a dopamine agonist or something that binds to dopamine receptors, you're essentially creating a situation for competitive blocking, right? So depending on how tightly your agonist binds to certain receptor subtypes and or how the binding affinity of kratom and its alkaloids, they're essentially, you can't have them both bound to receptors at the same time. And so they're essentially competing for each other for binding to those receptors in your nervous system. It doesn't necessarily mean that too much dopamine or additional dopamine will be released. It has a lot more to do with what they do once they bind to the receptor. So it's hard to say, but if you're adding two things that bind to the same receptor, you're creating competition for them. You're not potentiating it necessarily. You're potentially and probably most likely they're swapping in and out for each other. So you get 25% less effects of both taken at the same time. Prolactin is related to breast milk, and I knew that, and I knew that it was involved with like hormonal signaling, prolactin secretion, endocrine neurons in the hypothalamus that secrete dopamine to D2 receptors, causing inhibition. So it looks like stimulation of D2 receptors, lacotropes, causes the inhibition of prolactin secretion. Does that vibe with what she said? This dopamine agonist lowers prolactin levels. So, given that kratom is also a dopamine agonist, I would say that it's safe to assume that it also lowers prolactin. But I am unaware of any studies that looked at kratom and prolactin or hormonal signaling together. So head to head, kratom head to toe, case of adverse side effects of kratom use. So this is a 2019 article from Boston, Massachusetts, home of pharmaceutical companies galore. Anyways, there's a sentence in here that refers to kratom. Kratom administration was associated with elevated prolactin and reduced testosterone levels.
Okay.
I've heard about people talk about reduced testosterone levels in kratom in the
That's another
context of
weird one.
their sex
Yeah.
drive. Yeah. And if your dopaminergic drugs, which is what the bromocriptine is also a dopamine agonist, they both would increase prolactin levels. Kratom, as an emerging drug of abuse, raises prolactin and causes secondary hypogonadism.
I've saw that. I've seen that one. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard from people who said it increases their libido, decreases, and I feel like most people say it doesn't do anything. That's what it does for me. Nothing helps or hurts that.
It's hard to say, and a lot of it, a lot of it goes back to like saying set and setting. So what your expectations are going into the use, it like helps facilitate. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it looks like there are people that are looking at it, but it's not the biggest area of kratom research, that's for sure.
That's kind of the next one. Mazzy Cat asked, I've noticed that kratom use increases OCD-like thoughts and behaviors somewhat. Is this effect common and why might this happen? I feel like if you have OCD, then it might, because with me, I get a little energy boost and I get a little focus. And somebody who has OCD is already kind of hyper-focused on their obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors, like, if they take kratom, they'll probably alphabetize their book collection or whatever. But I feel like that is, if you already have OCD, then it might increase that temporarily just while you have the kratom. But I don't know. I don't know about any of the science on that or if it's available. Well, like, this is one of those things where there hasn't been a lot of studies in kratom on humans, so there has definitely not been specific studies on humans who have been diagnosed with OCD. I really don't think there. If there is, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, and OCD is primarily, it seems to be the serotonin hypothesis of OCD has been formulated following the observation of the efficacy of antidepressants in OCD. So people are treating OCD with SSRIs. I noticed increases in OCD-like thoughts and behaviors is somewhat. So that's increasing. So, that could be due to an increase in catecholamine signaling activity, the dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine type drugs. Further complicating things is the efficacy of amphetamines, decreased dopamine transporter activity. So, efficacy of amphetamines. Do you think amphetamines reduce the symptoms of OCD, or do you think it makes it worse? Yeah. Furthermore, increased dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens after deep brain stimulation correlates with improvement in symptoms, pointing to reduced dopamine release in the striatum playing a role in generating symptoms. So, if you increase the amount of dopamine signaling or serotonin signaling, you're seeing a reduction in OCD-like symptoms. So, I don't know why the kratom use would increase OCD-like symptoms. I have not. Is this effect common, and why might it happen? It's definitely related to catecholamine signaling, and it's not that common. I haven't really heard a lot about OCD or people with OCD using kratom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a stumper. Now, the next one, I don't understand this question because I've never heard of this, and it seems to completely contradict the effects that I've had with kratom. He says, is there any way to counteract the brain fog and memory issues that kratom causes? Maybe get another brand because it might be contaminated.
Yeah. I've never really had a brain fog or memory issues with kratom. Not to the extent that alcohol can, or even like cannabis or an edible in terms of brain fog. So I don't know. I don't really know which fog you're thinking about there. Here's what I'd say: set and setting. Your mindset going into it will affect how you experience the drug. So maybe try thinking that it's not going to give you brain fog or memory issues.
And everything isn't necessarily caused by kratom. It might be something else that you're experiencing. Like this other guy said he has sleep paralysis. This is the very bottom. Why does kratom cause these unusual sleep paralysis feelings only when laying down to go to sleep at night? It almost feels like a seizure. Dude, I don't think that's kratom. I mean, I feel like, try to change your vendor, I guess. But... And again, you should go to a doctor and talk about that shit. But I've never heard of kratom causing sleep paralysis. There's nothing in the literature about that. I haven't even seen that kind of comment before. So it's kind of like, sometimes it's just, you can't blame it on the substance. It might be something else.
What do they mean by sleep paralysis? Like they feel like they can't move?
I've experienced that one time. It's almost like, this is like years ago. It's on my parents' couch. I think I was in college and visiting home, and I just couldn't move. Like you feel like you're awake, but you can't move. Like you're almost to that waking period. I think that's like a mental issue. I don't think it's a result of the kratom at all.
Yeah, and I wonder. Yeah, if it's lucid dreaming or like there are other opiates involved, I think you're right, Brian.
I've had that once or twice, and it's just like you feel like you're about to get up, you're still kind of sleepy, but usually you can move, and then you can't move. And it is really weird, and it's like some people say, oh, it's an alien spaceship. I think it's probably an alien spaceship that's sending a beam down on you and not the kratom. Yeah. But they didn't get you. At least they didn't get you. They started to bring you up, but they didn't get you.
You made it.
Okay, and this other guy is talking about psychedelics. His grandfather was bipolar. He's basically asking if it's okay if I continue to take psychedelics, or am I playing with a loaded gun? He loves mushrooms, deep spiritual level. But his grandpa's bipolar, so is he going to end up in an institution? I've known people who've had bad experiences with psychedelics because they've had schizophrenic parents. But I don't know, bipolar's a little different. And it's like, we can't tell you what to do or not. It's like this is your own thing that you have to choose, basically. But I feel like people with a family history of mental illness should be really careful and just do as much of your own research as you can. But I don't know.
Yeah, this is very specific. Grandpa has bipolar. Am I going to get bipolar? Are you playing with it? It's very difficult to say. If you're talking about mushrooms, I think that they're one of the safest drugs that exists. This hallucinatory, like persistent perception disorder, this HPPD. I don't really subscribe to the notion that people like can have flashbacks. Like acid gets stored in your spinal cord. Like a lot of that is based out of like hysteria from DARE and bad drug education. I mean, once you see what trailing, like trailers look like, or
you notice it,
lines vibrate. Yeah,
yes,
you can see it again.
You notice it, like if you're sleepy or you're looking out of the side corner of your eye, or you're looking really close at like a TV with just snow on it. You can notice patterns. I definitely had that. Yeah. But I don't. It's not any kind of psychosis. It's just kind of like your brain remembering what tripping was like.
Yeah, that's what I think. I don't think that people are like all of a sudden thrown back into this psychedelic like state. It was such an impactful, experience that they remember what it was like, and so they can start seeing things like that. But if you do stay up for too long, you will start hallucinating. That's for sure. I mean, lack of sleep can do that to you. I don't know. It's hard for me to say, what your particular journey is going to be. I don't think that you have a huge risk eating mushrooms, but I understand it's a difficult conversation to have with like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But if that's the case, maybe you need a new psychologist or psychiatrist than one that's going to tell you that mushrooms might be dangerous. There's very little risk of like an overdose or too much catecholamine activity with the mushroom. So if you're just sticking to that, I think you'll be all right. When you get to Molly or MDMA and like some of like ayahuasca or some of the other like research chemical types, there's LSD-A. I just stick to mushrooms. I think you'll have a fulfilled life, and I don't think you need to worry about like falling into bipolar disorder. Moreover, if you do fall into bipolar disorder, like maybe that was your genetic destiny, and whether or not you took mushrooms or not was irrelevant. Don't like on the previous question, don't blame it on the kratom just because that's what you think you should blame it on.
My two friends with schizophrenia who did acid and it didn't work out for them, they just stopped doing it and they're fine now. They had parents with schizophrenia. It was like, it seems to be genetic, and two friends that I know, but yeah, they would acid. It was like always a bad trip, but it didn't permanently change their brain chemistry. That's, don't take it as medical advice. That's what I'm saying. It's good that you're careful. Like, do as much research as you can. All right, thank you, Dr. Cachat, at @JCachat on Twitter. Like I said, call in with questions, 412-353-9770. Coming up, we will have return to Kratom Stories, as well as more Journal Club and more Kratom Science Podcasts, interviews with scientists. The music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is called Moon Runner. The Kratom Science Podcast is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.